Parsha Massei. Mem Samech Ayin. That's your root right there. Mem Samech Ayin. Let me get myself going here. The journeys since we left Egypt, when we left Mitzrayim. Numbers chapter 30, verse 2 is the first beginning of the reading to chapter 36, verse 13. We didn't do the whole thing. Now, last Shabbat, we did the other one. You probably noticed that I cheated a little bit. I had my tote there. That's because I forgot to change it. However, Matot, if you go back to page 187, is the one that we read last week. In normal years, you read Matot and Massei both together. It's all combined as one. But this is the leap year. So we happen to have one extra month added in, so now we've got some extra weeks, and that's where you've got it split. Matot is last week's, and Massei is this week's. So you notice that Moses begins to tell the new generation, we're at the end of the 40 years. Most of the people who are now listening to him as he's recounting the story of the journey, they were not adult enough to be able to go ahead and remember all this stuff. I remember when I was in the Marine Corps, my little children, Justin and Becky, who are adults now, they have their own kids and families, they couldn't remember every single base that I went to. I went to a lot of different bases. So when they were little, like Gavin's little, he might not remember every place that they've been, just that they traveled a lot. Dad, I remember you traveled a lot. You were stationed all over the place. Okay, they remember that. Okay, did you know where we started? 29 Palms, California. So I fill in the detail. And I say, well, this is where we went next. This is where we went next. This new generation has to hear the story before they go into the land. And that's what they're hearing. They're hearing the story of now. We're just getting ready to go into the land. The Lord is wrapping up things in the wilderness. We're almost done. Remember when we started with Parsha Midbar in the wilderness? We remember we looked at the root and we saw Midbar, which means to speak. Deber is word. So Bay Midbar is the wilderness, and we talked about where do we hear things better? In a crowded, and earlier today, while people were all talking and stuff, I was trying to carry on a conversation. I couldn't hear, I had a hard time listening to you. So you came right up over here, it got really close to me, and I could hear you better. We all hear better when it's quiet than when it's noisy. So there's a tie, as we talked about at the very beginning of this book, between Bemidbar, which means wilderness, and Middeber, which has the Dalet, the Bet, and the Resh, where it means to speak. God is beginning to wrap things up, and now we're at the very end of the book of Bemidbar. And as I just said, for most of the years, these two Parshot, Massei and Matot, are all together, but this is a leap year, and thus they are read separately. Moses goes over 40 years of Israelite journeys. That's what the word means. Massei means journeys through the desert. And here then, in this Parsha, we also get the boundaries of Israel, the nation. How it's to be divided amongst the tribes by lot. Where the cities for the Levites would be, and the cities of refuge. Then finally, at the very close of this, we've got Selofhad's daughters, and if you recall from the previous Parsha, Selofhad was a man who died in the wilderness. He wasn't a rebel against God, but he died in the wilderness, and all he has left as his progeny are daughters. And what's to be done? Do they inherit the land or don't they inherit the land? And how does all this work? Because the land is to stay in the tribe. It's to remain with the tribe itself. So we answer that as well. In the first Aliyah, from Numbers chapter 33, verses 1 through 10, if you wanted to turn to that, that's on page 191. Here Moses then records the various journeys of the Israelites from Mitzrayim, as directed by God. By the way, you will find, as you do research, if you want to study into it, different scholars have different theories as to where the wanderings were. A lot of people think that Mount Sinai, St. Catherine's Monastery, that you and Larry visited, and I didn't because I had pneumonia. A lot of people think that's the Mount Sinai. No, it's not. We explained that earlier. But the thing is, that's back in Egypt. And you know what Scripture says to Jewish people? Don't go back to Egypt. Okay, I'm not going back to Egypt. I caught pneumonia instead. I think God kept me from going back to Egypt, I guess. But you've got different people, different scholars. Now there's Ramses, at least that's what they think it is. There's Sukkot, by some scholars' definition, right there. Now, you know the land, there's Hebron, where Abraham lived for quite some time. There's Shavah. Be'er means well. Shavah means 7. This is where the wells that were dug by Abraham and Isaac were, right there. There's Shavah. And there's Hebron, where Abraham lived for quite some time. Remember the book of Exodus, when we were on our way out of Egypt, there was a way that we could have gone that would have taken us in a much more direct route to the Holy Land, the land of promise. And that was the way to the land of the Philistines. Now notice that in that territory right there, does anyone see that word Gaza? Does anyone keep up with the news lately? Have you then?
No, the news is boring.
Oh, but the news tells us something interesting, Gavin. You know what? There are thousands of missiles that are being shot into the land of Israel from Gaza. Now, Israel, under Ariel Sharon, some years ago, under President Bush's tenure in the White House here, Ariel Sharon gave back Gaza to the Philistines. I'll call them what it is. There's really not a group of Philistines that are identifiable as such a group, but considering that Gaza was where the Philistines came, and by the way, out of this particular area also is where Goliath came from. You see, these people were a thorn in the side of Israel for centuries. Now that sort of reminds me of my Parsha here. If you go to Numbers chapter 33, verse 55. But if you don't drive out the inhabitants of the land from in front of you, then those you allow to remain will become like thorns in your eyes and stings in your side, and they will harass you in the land where you're living. Is God's word true? Is it happening today? You betcha it is. This battle is still not done with. And it's happening with more fervor. And more nations are getting involved. But these people in this area, in the way to the land of the Philistines, these people were a very warlike people. By the way, by the time of the Romans, there were 3 main trade routes through the land of Israel. We've talked about it. This is one way to go through the land of the Philistines, right here through Gaza. By the time of the Romans, it's known as the Via Maris. The way, Via Maris, the sea. So the Romans called it the Via Maris. This is the route for that. There was a middle route for trade, and that was on the way to shore, right through the middle part, through Beersheba, through Hebron, up next to Jerusalem, and keeping on going north. And finally, you have the King's Highway. So you have the 3 main trade routes going right through the land right here. And what we see here then is some scholars saying, well, this is the way that Israel went when they left the land. They went from Ramses to Sukkot to Pithom. And by the way, they picked up Joseph's bones. Then it said they went all the way down to Rephidim. By the way, if you have some of these maps that have names on it, you're going to find a lot of maps having these words of these locations, but having a big question mark behind them. You know why they have a big question mark behind them? Because they don't know. And then you've got a lot of others. Here's the traditional Mount Sinai, where we were right here in Eilat. They call it Eilat now. It's Etzion Geber in those days. But we were up in a lot at a hotel, and there you've got Saudi Arabia on this side. You've got the Sinai Peninsula, that's still Egypt on this side. And then you've got Israel going up on this side, and we were down here. And Larry Morrell and I just blanked. Robin, they went to the traditional Mount Sinai. And there's a big mountain there, and they've got a monastery there called St. Catherine's Monastery, and you can make your pilgrimage all the way up to the top of that, all those steps, lots of steps. I read about it. I didn't do it. And that's where they believe it was. And then Israel went up the Gulf, next to the Gulf of Aqaba, and went up here, and then went traveling through the wilderness of Sin. Then ultimately they go up into the land. Well, that's one theory. That's the traditional route. So if you look at that theory, you can see here where a lot of cities are named. You got Ramses, Sukkot, you got Etam, you got Tahirot, you got Migdal. Migdal, by the way, means tower. Then they crossed here. That's where they're assuming that the Sea of Reeds was, Yom Suf. And then they got Mara down here, Elim down here, you've got Dafka down here, Alush here, Rephidim, Mount Sinai, the traditional one. Then going up with all these other names that I listed through, that's the traditional route. That's what it looks like. There's another route possibility though, and that is coming from the land of Goshen. They could have gone across to Sukkot. They would have taken the middle route, which would have been this one right here. There was a road, an alternative road right here that they could have taken across and gotten down to this area. And then they come to Etam, then they go out to Al-Tafan, and then they come right up to this location right here. Now it's very interesting, and it was actually Ron Wyatt, I think, an amateur archaeologist, that postulated that. And at first I was skeptic. I don't just jump on board things without doing a lot of research. I went along with the traditional Mount Sinai for years and years and years, and had to be convinced. And it's really interesting that on both sides of this part of the Gulf of Aqaba, the sea, that there were standing stones, or pillars I should say, put up by King Solomon. They're still there. What was the significance of these pillars being on both sides right here? Well, it's really interesting because Ron Wyatt did some looking, and they went underwater and they were able to find coral formations that are not natural coral formations. How does coral formate underwater? By attaching itself to something solid down there, or not solid, but they attach themselves. And what Ron Wyatt was able to find out was there were shapes of coral that looked like this. Chariot wheels. Furthermore, at that location, there was also, you've got, I'm going to try to draw this. Artistry is not one of my strengths, obviously. Here on one side, you've got where they were up against the water, right there. And then you've got a little underwater, you got a little land bridge here. It's deep on this side, it's deep on this side, but between the two, you've got a place that there's a land bridge that's not as deep. That's where these chariot wheels were found. And then on the other side, you've got the pillar that Solomon put up. I wonder, why did Solomon put up those pillars? Unless there was something very significant about it. And it took a little while to get to the point in my brain to say, maybe the traditional Mount Sinai is not right. Let me keep going. Well, if you get to this side, now you're into what is now called Saudi Arabia. And you get to this side, and then you finally find around the place, it's Jebel Laz, it's called in Arabic. You found another mountain here. Now it's really interesting that surrounding this mountain, the Saudi Arabian military has fenced it in so that nobody can go in and out of it, because before that got fenced in, they were able to find petroglyphs. You know what a petroglyph is? It's where there's writing in stone. And they found petroglyphs up on that mountain that were Paleo-Hebraic. So now you're finding a little bit more support for here as being Mount Sinai than at St. Catherine's Monastery in the traditional Mount Sinai. But let me give you some more thought. Which group of people lived here at the time of Moses? Midianites. Who was Moses' father-in-law? He was a Midianite. Now, think about it like this. This, by the way, is still Egyptian territory during the time of Moses. So if indeed Moses had to escape to get away from Pharaoh, he had to cross somewhere. He finally made his way to Midian. This is not Midianite territory. It's still Egyptian territory. So, if he had to escape because he killed the taskmaster, he escaped to the land of Midian, which is over here on this side of the Gulf of Aqaba. And so therefore, there's a little bit more support for the fact that Mount Sinai is not here, but it's here. So what you're finding out is, why is it that Saudi Arabia has put a fence around it? Because it lends more credibility to the Hebrew Bible. They're Islamic. They don't want to lend more credibility to the Hebrews any more than they already have.
No.
So you've got this. This is the only place they could have crossed when God opened up the waters, because it wasn't as deep. It's deep here, but it's not so deep there. And you got formations that look like chariot wheels and chariots down below the water, right here in this particular area. So I have come to the point of understanding that if Moses was trying to escape from Pharaoh, why is he going to stay down here and take care of his father-in-law's sheep? If he were dumb enough to do that, he's all by himself with a whole bunch of sheep far away from any help, and he's still in Pharaoh's territory. So if he's trying to escape, why is he still in Pharaoh's territory? That doesn't make sense. Here is where he is. This is the land of the Midianites. This is where he would be tending his sheep. He wouldn't be all the way down here tending sheep. And that wouldn't be where Mount Sinai is. So what you got here is, this is the most likely Mount Sinai that there is. And tradition aside, there are people, as a brother just shared with me, you can share with people, your brothers and sisters in the Lord, and you can think you can convey this whole thing, and you think they see it, and you think it, but what do they end up doing? They go back to what? Tradition. This is the Jewish people as well as the Christians. I believe now, after studying it out, that Israel went up from the land of Goshen to Sukkot. Sukkot, by the way, is where you got the word tabernacles from, and went through the middle route to Etam. Now God led them south. And that's where Pharaoh was saying, aha, got them now. Because once they got into this mountainous route, they came over to this area. There was only one way in and one way out. There's your jut of land there that they were standing against the sea. But they had no way out, and the people knew it, and so did Pharaoh. Aha, we have them now.
Are you saying there's only one way?
There's only one way. But the way out for Israel was across right here, from this point here to across back to the Midianite territory, not the Egyptian territory. So they came here, Pharaoh thought they had them, God opened up the sea, we went across, We came to this side, God closed up the sea, and now that's why you have chariot wheel formations of the coral and all the rest of it. And then you went through Rephidim, you went through all these other things. Then finally, you went to Mount Sinai in the land of Midian. That's where I'm at. I don't agree with the traditional position anymore. And I wasn't about to climb up a few hundred steps to get to the top of the traditional Mount Sinai and whatever. The second Aliyah, Numbers 33, 11 to 49. Here's where the Israelites journeyed from the Sea of Reeds, Yom Suf, to the wilderness of Sin. Well, you might say, because it sounds sort of the same, but it doesn't. Just because a word in one language sounds the same as a word in another doesn't mean it correlates one to another. My Hebrew teacher is getting into a lot of that good stuff, and I'm like, okay, here's this word and here's this word. Do they mean the same thing? She said, no, they don't. Even though they have the same root, the triliteral root, they don't always mean the same thing. So here Moses then keeps on going through the whole trip. Why does he want to have the whole trip brought out for Israel? Whether or not it was this way or whether or not it was that way and across, why does he want to do that? Because, excuse me, the pain. Because in our Compass Lesson 101, when I was in the Marine Corps boot camp, before you can go anywhere and know where you're going, what do you have to know first? Where you are. If you don't know where you are, there's no map that's going to help you. If you don't know where you are on that map and which direction you have to go. Well, what is God doing? He's teaching Israel, the new generation, here's where we've been. Here's how God has led us. And we saw this in the book of Numbers. For 40 years, did our shoes wear out? No. For 40 years, did our clothes wear out? No. For 40 years, did God provide for us water? Well, maybe not all the time when we wanted water, but did He? Yeah. Did He provide for us food? Yeah. Did we always enjoy it? No. Manna. I'm getting sick and tired of this stuff. But He did provide it. He took care of us. You know when the manna stopped? When we got to the border to go into the land. And you know when the cloud didn't show up anymore? When we got to the border of the land. When we were getting ready to go into the land of promise, as God promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, then not only did the cloud disappear, we were headed to Jericho at this point. There's Mount Nebo, where Moses gets to see the land. By the way, the land extends all the way up from the top there all the way down. And Moses gets to see the whole land. The only way that God could do that is to show it to him in the Spirit. But they're getting ready to cross the Jordan River, and they're getting ready to go into Jericho. And here what we see is the cloud doesn't lead us anymore. And the manna does not come from heaven anymore. We go into the land, we eat the fruit of the land, and Moses is left behind because he's going to die in this next book of Deuteronomy. He's going to die, and the Lord is going to bury him. And who leads then the people of Israel into the promised land? Joshua does. So Moses, representing Torah, gets you to the land, but Moses doesn't bring you into the land. It's Yehoshua or Yeshua who gets you into the promised land. We talked about that last week. So however you want it, you could keep the traditional viewpoint if you want. Still a long trip. It's 40 years. The children of Israel needed to know where they came from so that when they go into the promised land, they'll know where they've been and they'll know what they've been through. Now, we read about that in today's Parsha, where where Aaron dies. If you look at page 191 on your complete Jewish Bible, Numbers chapter 33, 38, it says, at Adonai's order, Aharon the Cohen went up on Mount Hor, and he died there on the first day of the 5th month of the 40th year after the people of Israel had left the land of Egypt. Aharon was 123 years old when he died on Mount Hor. I like, in another part of the Parsha, it says, and he was gathered to his people. I find it very interesting, that phrase, being gathered to his people. And wherever they are, I mean, you know that Moses is going to be on Mount Nebo up here, and he too is going to be gathered to his people. And what we're seeing, that little phrase, is a very interesting Hebraic idiom, and that means that, as Yeshua said, to the Sadducees, you don't understand Scripture. Because whose wife is she going to be in the resurrection? What did Yeshua say? That God is not the God of the dead, He's the God of the living. And we could see that in the transfiguration on the mountain, when Yeshua brought a couple of his disciples up there, and there was Moses, and then there was Elijah. Well, who do we have up there? We have Yeshua, who's God incarnate, the one who led the people of Israel. We had Moses, who led the people of Israel up to the border of the Promised Land. And now we've got Elijah, who represents the prophets. And here we have, at the Mount of Transfiguration, we have Moses. Is he still alive? Yes, he is. How about Elijah, who was caught up into heaven? Is he alive? Yeah. God is the God of the living and not the God of the dead. God is alive. Even Aaron is alive. So here's where Aaron dies at Mount Hor. He's 123 years old. Continuing on with the journey from Mount Hor to Zalmanah to Canaan to Oboth to all these other places, to the steppes of Moab. And finally we get to the boundaries of the land. I want you to go there with me. You'll see it on chapter 34. You're going to see, beginning in verse 1, the Lord tells Moses, give this order to the people of Israel. When you enter the land of Canaan, it will become your land to pass on as an inheritance, the land of Canaan as defined by these borders. Now, you got the borders listed out there. Now, when you come into the land is going to be divided up. We did a census in 3 parshas earlier. We did a census. The tribes that have the largest number of people get what? The larger land. The tribes that have the smaller number of people get what? Less land. Now, some of these tribes chose to remain, as we talked about last Shabbat, they chose to remain on the eastern side of the Jordan River. That is the tribe of Reuben, the tribe of Gad. Now, you've got Manasseh, the half tribe of Manasseh that stayed on this side, on the eastern side, and then the other half of the tribe of Manasseh stayed on the western side, toward the sea. So you've got Reuben and Gad. They don't have any inheritance within the land of promise itself. They are on the opposite side, and they're on what we would call Jordan today. The land of Jordan. Now, what you got here then is the half-tribe of Manasseh goes all the way up here to the Golan Heights. That's up in this area. Aram, by the way, is Syria. So you got Syria, you got Damascus up here. You got half the tribe on the eastern side of the Jordan River to the Kinneret. Kinner in Hebrew means a harp. So if you take a look at the shape of what is often called the Sea of Galilee, or the Lake Kinneret, you see it's shaped in the shape of a harp of those days. So what you've got is you've got the waters for the Jordan River starting up here and following itself down to the Kinneret, which fills up. It's rather low after many, many years of drought. Then the Jordan River goes all the way down until you get to the Dead Sea. And it's on this side where we see Edom. The Edomites were descendants of Esau. The Moabites. You've got now the tribe of Reuben. By the way, Moab is one of the 2 sons of Lot. The Ammonites, Ammon is the other son of Lot through his daughter. Both of these children are through incest. Their daughters got Lot drunk, and there were two sons produced. One was Moab, the other was Ammon. Reuben and Gad, and then Manasseh. Then on the other side, on the west bank that we would call it now, Naphtali, Asher, Zebulun, Issachar, the half-tribe of Manasseh, Ephraim, Benjamin, Dan, and Judah. Now you notice that Simeon is within the tribe of Judah. We talked about that last time. If you go to the blessings that Israel gave to his sons just before he died, you'll see in one of the blessings in Genesis 49, you're going to see in verse number 5, it says, Shimon and Levi are brothers, related by weapons of violence. Let me not enter their council. Let my honor not be connected with their people. For in their anger they killed men, and at their whim they maimed cattle. Cursed be their anger, for it has been fierce. Their fury, for it has been cruel. I will divide them in Yaakov. Yaakov is Jacob's name, and he becomes Israel after wrestling with the angel. And it goes on to say, and scatter them in Israel. What did God do? Well, Simeon is found within the tribe of Judah. That fits right along with the prophetic word that Dad gave before he passed away. So where is Levi? He's scattered all the way in the land of Israel. We're going to talk about that in this Parsha too. Let's move on. Numbers 33:50 to 34:15. In the steppes of Moab, the Moabite kingdom, God told Moses to direct the Israelites that when they crossed the Jordan into Canaan, they were to dispossess all the inhabitants of the land, destroy all their figured objects. They had idols, little clay idols of Ishtar and other goddess or gods, and they worshiped these things, molten images and their high places. And they were to take possession of them, destroy everything that had to do with the cults and pagan worship, and to settle into the land. And then, of course, as we just mentioned, they had to apportion the land among themselves by lot, clan by clan, with the share varying with the size of the group. Now, this is where I want to dwell on just for a moment. God warned that if the Israelites did not dispossess those inhabitants of the land, those who they allowed to remain would become stings in their eyes and thorns in their side and would harass the Israelites in the land. Well, when has there ever been a time when there was at least some semblance of peace in the land? Solomon. Yep. Remember, David is not a king of peace. He had blood in his hand. That's why God would not allow him to build the temple. But Solomon, on the other hand, was allowed to build the temple. And so therefore, when you look at this, even after the first temple was destroyed, you still have some of those. The Edomites were very happy to go in and help destroy the place of worship for the Jewish people. If you hear the word Idumea, King Herod comes from that place. It was known by the Romans as Idumea, Edom. So the Edomites were amongst those that were thorns in the sides of Israel.
Isn't there an apostle that had a thorn in his side?
Well, there is, but I won't carry it that far. You know, he's from Benjamin. But the Benjaminites caused problems themselves and almost were totally wiped out at one time. But I'm not going to get into that because that's not part of this thing. Okay, so what we see happening before our very eyes today. What have we seen since Israel became a nation? As soon as David Ben-Gurion proclaimed Israel as a nation, what did their Arab neighbors do? Immediately, they attacked. They tried to wipe out Israel and to throw us all into the sea. What are they doing today? They're attacking. What's their intent? To throw us into the sea. That would be Satan's plan. Good plan, right? Satan's plan is, if he can get all of Israel totally destroyed, then the Messiah can't possibly come back. Did you know that? Has not the church, for the last 2,000 years, under persecution, and I admit under persecution, have they not been calling out Maranatha, Maranatha, come quickly, Lord? Yeah? Well, has the Lord come yet? It isn't going to be at the behest of the church that the Lord is going to come. And I'm talking about the second coming. Hey, the church has been doing this for 2,000 years. Do you know how many Christians are fleeing Iraq right now? There's this group called ISIS who's trying to install another caliphate in all that land. It's happening before our very eyes. It's happening. There are thorns in the sides. Christians are fleeing because Christians are given three choices. Choice number one, and by the way, this is historical. It's happened in the past during the time of Muhammad. It's happened ever since that time, and it's happening to this very day. If you're of the people of the book, and Christians and Jews are regarded as people of the book, here's your three choices. Ready? Choice one, convert to Islam. And you'll notice that everybody underneath the beast gets this mark. And they have to do, it's not just a political thing, but it's a religious thing too. It's worship. So you got choice number one, Christian or Jew, convert to Islam, and we won't kill you. The second choice, and it's been done throughout history, did you know that Spain was under Islamic rule, under a caliphate for many centuries?
What do we consider, Christians or Jews? What do you want to be? B'nai Elohim. Children of God.
Israel. Ephesians 2. Israel. So the thing is, here's your second choice. And the Spanish people who remained Christian or Catholic had to, in order to keep their faith, had to pay a tax. That's known as a jizya tax. So you got two choices there. Either one, convert to Islam, or you pay a tax. And if you pay a tax, number one, under Islamic rule, no new churches are to be established or built. Number two, crosses are cut off from churches. That's what they're doing now. Bibles are being burned. Christians that don't go along with 1 and 2 are getting option number 3. Anybody know what option number 3 is? That's it. Beheaded. Those are your three options. Those are your choices. It's historical, it's real, and when a caliphate is established, and it will be, because I believe, as Walid Shubat, my eyes opened up, as Walid says, I believe that the anti-Messiah is actually the Islamic Mahdi. He is the one that's going to be worshipped, and he's empowered by the dragon, and the dragon in Revelation chapter 12 is Satan. So, we know where it is, and Allah, by the way, isn't the God of the Bible. Don't let anybody convince you that. They're going to try. Allah is Satan. Look at what he does. Look at what his adherents do. Allah is not God. Okay. So now we're shown the boundaries. If you go back to the Parsha, you're going to see how God goes ahead and says, here is where your southern portion will be in verse number 3. Then the western portion is going to be the Great Sea, the Mediterranean. Your northern border will be from the Great Sea to Mount Hor, and then the eastern border, you're going to see it just like this. Now you've got two different ways to see this. One is in our Parsha today, and that is in Numbers 34, that's the red one right here. So here's your western boundary. Then it goes down here, and it comes north. Then it comes over to the Golan Heights. We got the Golan Heights, and then it comes back over to the sea. Here's Mount Hor. This is where the traditional one is down there. But anyway, here's the one that we know today. Now in Ezekiel 47, there's another map or definition of boundaries are given in Ezekiel 47, 13 through 20, and that's in the blue right here. Now the closest we've ever come to that is during the time of the reign of Solomon, which went beyond this. But these are the borders. That is biblical border. Here's where Israel is today. I wanted to do a comparison. You'll notice that the border of Israel, in either case, we're right up alongside of the Jordan River. And we go continuing north. Well, according to the partition, that was pre-67. That's why President Obama wants to go to the pre-67 borders with the 1949 armistice. Here's why. Because at one time, Jordan, by the way, that was known as Transjordan, according to the British mandate, all of this was supposed to be the Israeli state.
Yes.
That then the Islamics made such a big, huge stink about the whole thing that then they had to redivide it. So Jordan ended up owning this part of the land. Syria owned this part of the land, the Golan Heights. That's Syria right there. And then you have what is known as the West Bank today. This is the West Bank. According to the way the world is looking at it right now, the West Bank is occupied territory. We, as Jewish people, are occupying a land that, according to the world, belongs to the Palestinians. Wrong. And in fact, the Palestinians are a group of people that when war came, their leaders told them to run away, get out of there, leave everything behind. And so when we had the initial war against Israel by all the enemies of Israel surrounding her, then a lot of these people known as Palestinians now escaped out into the Arab lands. Now, Jordan became part of the Arab lands, and that was where the Palestinian people were supposed to go.
Right.
But under Arafat, the Palestinians, the PLO under Arafat, fought against the Jordanian king. And then he ended up having to go into exile in Lebanon for a little while there because his life was in jeopardy. But Jordan took over this land here, Nablus. That's Arab town right now. Hebron is, mostly. You've still got a few Jews up there on a hill, but they're under high security fences and stuff. But this, according to the world, and this is the territory that's being exploited a lot on the news, you know, the poor people of Palestine, they have no place to go. Well, technically they were supposed to be over here. Now they're all over trying to claim more land, and now they want more land. By the way, this state of Israel is smaller than the state of New Jersey in our country. And still the Arabs want more. But if they were to give, Israel were to give more land to them, that would not satisfy them. Look what happened when, under Ariel Sharon, Israel gave back the Gaza Strip back to the Palestinians. All it does is make a launching pad for more rockets, for more warfare, and for tunnels that are going underneath the Gaza Strip into the land of Israel so that the Israelites can be terrorized. The whole idea is to get Israel out into the sea, to totally demolish it, and then all this land will be theirs. But you know, Islamic countries have millions and millions and millions of acres. You could put those Palestinians someplace, but that's not what they want. They want all of it. And just like the prophetic word that we got here in our book of Numbers, they're the thorns in our sides. We let them live. You're going to see that in the book of Joshua when they went in, Israel went into the land. We let them live. And ever since, they've been thorns in our sides. And they will be until the Messiah comes. The fourth Aliyah is where Moses names the men who will go into the land. And this is really interesting. I want you to look at Numbers chapter 34, beginning in verse number 16. Adonai says to Moshe, "These are the names of the men who will take possession of the land for you. Eleazar the Cohen. Now he's one of the sons of Aaron. And Yehoshua, the son of Nun. Now that doesn't mean none, just because it sounds like he had no father. No, that was the father's name. He actually did have a father. But Joshua represented the tribe of Benjamin normally. Look at verse number 19. The names of the men are, from the tribe of Judah, who?
Caleb.
Caleb is a dog. I didn't see any surprised looks. You know why? Because the Hebrew word for dog is Caleb. And by the way, if you just break that word down, Lev, you know what it means? Heart. Caleb had a heart for God. And, by the way, he's the son of Tzephuneh. He wasn't even Jewish. He wasn't even Hebrew. So what you've got here is a man, Caleb, who had a heart for God, who represented the tribe of Judah. And guess which city he received when he went into the land? Hebron. Who is buried in Hebron? Abraham, Isaac, their wives. So what you're seeing here is a very high honor given to a man who was, by the way, one of the two spies who came back with a good report and said, yeah, we could take him. And so it is Caleb who receives the land on behalf of Judah. Then you've got the descendants of Simeon, you got Benjamin, you got Manasseh, the half-tribe. By the way, where's the other half-tribe? They're not in the land. You got them all the way back in chapter 32, verse 31. The descendants of Gad and Reuben answered, we will do as the Lord said, and we'll go into the land armed. And the same thing with the half-tribe of Manasseh. So this representative in verse 23 of the tribe of Manasseh only represents that one half of the tribe of Manasseh that actually went into the land. The other half was on the eastern side of the Jordan River. Now Moses is instructed here to tell the Israelites to assign for the Levites. Now, the Levites have no land inheritance. So Moses tells Joshua and Eleazar, you need to go ahead and assign out of the cities of Israel, you need to assign territories, cities, and other land holdings so that they can go ahead and grow crops and whatnot. So what you've got here is, here's a, wherever you see the little red circle, that is a city of refuge. So you've got Kadesh up here, you've got on the Golan, you've got one down here, you've got one all the way down here, Bezer, I can barely read it. It's Shechem right here, that's a Levitical city, and Hebron down here. You've got actually 6 cities that are being represented where the Levites were to hold. Then you've got other Levitical cities. So what you've got is 48 towns in all, of which 6 were going to be cities of refuge where a manslayer can flee to. Talk about that in a moment. This is clear. You should have this on your handout. 3 of the 6 cities of refuge were to be on the east side. You had the Golan, Ramoth, Gilead, and Bezer. And then you had 3 on the western side, Kadesh, Shechem, and Hebron. Hebron, by the way, is what Caleb inherited on behalf of Judah. Shechem, by the way, if you recall your history from Genesis, means shoulders. And it sits on the shoulders of 2 distinct mountains, Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. So on the shoulders of these 2 mountains, where, by the way, when Israel came into the land, they were supposed to go ahead and build up rocks, standing stones with plaster on it. One was going to be where the curses are written. One is where the blessings were written. It's Mount Gerizim, where the blessings were to be written. Oops. And that is at the land, or right here in the city of Shechem. Let's talk about the cities of refuge just for a moment. And you're in chapter number 35. In chapter 35, the purpose was a place in the event that a person killed somebody else unintentionally. We call it manslaughter in our legal system today. Let's just say you were driving down the road, it was dark, and somebody stepped out into the street, not at a crosswalk, and you hit them.
That sounds like suicide, not manslaughter.
Well, that might be suicide on the part of the person who's stepping out of the street. But still, whenever you slay a man, whether it be intentionally or not intentionally, if you slay another human, you're a manslayer. And the question goes back down to motive. And that's the same thing in our legal system, which is based after the Latin legal system. And that is where you have different degrees of manslaughter or killing people. There's a difference between first-degree murder and second-degree murder. What's the difference between first-degree and second-degree? What? Intent is one. Opportunity is another. You've got to have intent, you have to have opportunity. So you look at the motive, the intent. Is there a benefit of that person killing somebody else for any reason? If you're married and one of you dies by homicide, guess who's the first person that the cops start looking at? The spouse. Remember this. Don't kill your spouse. You're the first one they're going to look for. And they're going to try to break your testimony. Okay. It has to do with motive. It has to do with intent. How does it benefit the person to have killed another person? So in the case of the guy who stepped out in the dark street at night and you hit him and he dies, what was your motive? You didn't have a motive except to get to where you needed to go to. Could he still be charged with manslaughter? It could, because you could be driving 45 miles an hour in a 25-mile-an-hour zone, and when that happened, boom, you were going too fast. So you could still be charged, and you still could go to jail. All I'm saying is here is the alternative. Here's God's way of doing it. There was a man in a family who is known as the Goel. Anybody remember that term from earlier? Who is a Goel? It's the kinsman redeemer. Now the job of a Goel isn't just simply to marry his brother's wife if he died without issue. That wasn't just the purpose. That one stands out most because we talked about it in the book of Ruth. But there are other reasons for a Goel. And the Goel, let me see if I've got that. I'm going to have to jump ahead. There we go. The word Goel in Hebrew means next of kin or a clansman. Number one, of avenging on the person of a murderer the blood of the murdered kinsman. So in this capacity, the more specific term of this Goel would be Goel Hadam. Dam means blood or red. Remember Edom? Why was he called Edom? Because he was red. Adam. Why was he called Adam? Well, think about this. What is earth? Out of the Adamah. And what kind of earth did Adam come out of? Red earth. Dam. So what you've got here is one function of the kinsman redeemer is if there was someone murdered in your clan, that kinsman redeemer would be the Goel Hadam, and he would be the blood avenger. Of course, the second purpose is redeeming the property or the person of a relative that had fallen into debt. That's another thing. But think about it this way. If you go to the book of Ruth and you see that there was a near kinsman redeemer, when Boaz presented to the 10 judges at the gate, said, here's the kinsman redeemer who is closer than I am. Does he want to redeem the land? The man said, yes, I do. Then when Boaz said, well, then if you want to redeem that land, you have to redeem Ruth, the Moabitess. You see, the land came with that person. and stayed within the tribe. So Ruth was married to one who was a Jew. So what we've got here is the kinsman redeemer, our Goel. Who's our Goel? Our Lord Yeshua. And that's why he says, I will avenge, saith the Lord. He can avenge. So, moving back a few, of course you see it's blue. It means what? You don't have it in your handout. You probably have no idea where we are in the handout right now. And neither do I. Why was it that there was a city of refuge? So that whoever slayed somebody could be brought before a trial without being killed by the Goel Hadam. So there was a trial before the men of the city. And if it were determined that the person killed that person unintentionally, then that person who slayed that man unintentionally was given refuge in the city. And according to Numbers 35:25, he can have that refuge there until the reigning high priest dies. Once the reigning high priest dies, he can leave the city, he can go anywhere he wants, and then the manslayer cannot touch him. However, if he left the city before the reigning high priest died, then when the manslayer caught up to him, then he could be put to death by the Goel Hadam. So the whole idea is to give a person who had innocently killed somebody, give them the ability to be brought to trial. Now, what would happen if during the trial it was determined he was guilty of murder?
He'd be put to death.
He'd be put to death. He could actually be kicked out of the city. The Goel Hadam could do with it what he needed to. So here's where all this fits together. That blood avenger, if he ever found that slayer outside the limits of the city of refuge before the high priest dies, then that Goel Hadam can kill him on sight. By the way, the death penalty was not something that was to be done lightly. In order to bring up a person on capital charges to be able to be charged with murder, Deuteronomy 17:6 tells us, on the evidence of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses, he who is to die shall be put to death. He shall not be put to death on the evidence of 1 witness. So number 1, it is simply not something that is a light thing to be done. It is something that you have to have 2 or 3 witnesses testify to. Now, here's something that we're going to get into when we get into Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy, if there were 2 false witnesses or 3 false witnesses that bring somebody up on capital charges, you got your 2 and 3 witnesses, but if they were false witnesses, and it turns out that they were false witnesses during the trial. Now, wasn't it true that during the trial of our Lord Yeshua, that there were false witnesses that were brought, but their testimony could not stand, because in interrogating, the judge or the judges would ask questions and finding out these stories don't match. They don't go together. According to Torah and Devarim, Deuteronomy, what is to happen to those 2 or 3 witnesses? Yes, they were to get the same penalty of death, exactly what would have happened to the person that they had brought up on capital charges. Now that would help to eliminate false witnesses a little bit. Except during the trial of Yeshua, they brought false witnesses up deliberately, and they weren't going to touch these false witnesses. They wanted Yeshua to be put to death. We see another example of that in the woman that was caught in adultery, where all these men had caught this woman in the very act of adultery. What do you say? Yeshua should be put to death. Well, doesn't Torah says if one is caught in adultery, they're supposed to be put to death? The answer is yeah. They. Because in Torah it says both the man and the woman are to be brought to trial. If Yeshua would have just said, oh yeah, put her to death, then he would have violated Torah. And then he couldn't have been the Messiah. And then we'd still be lost in our sins. But since they were caught in the very act of adultery, the man had to let the man part of the adultery go, because they were setting up a trap for Yeshua. Both had to be brought to trial. Both of them, if found guilty, had to be put to death. That's for when we get to that part of it. But 2 or 3 witnesses. The reason for the death penalty, and I know there are Christians who are opposed to the death penalty, I understand that. But the thing is, scripturally, they are wrong. That's as simple as it can get. We have to get to that a little bit later, but they are wrong. The scripture is the one that talks about it. Based on Genesis 9:6, the very first mention we've got it. Whoever sheds human blood by human being will his own blood be shed. For God made human beings in his image. Finally, we get to the daughters of Zelophehad, which we talked about briefly. The men, or the kinsmen of these daughters, were asking Moses, does the land go to these daughters since he doesn't have any sons? Moses asked the Lord, and as we talked about in the last Parsha, God said the land could go to the daughters. Well, the kinsmen were a little upset, because if the land goes to the daughters and the daughters marry somebody outside of their tribe, then where is that land going to go? It would go outside the tribe. God doesn't want that. The land is specified. This is where this tribe will be, this is where this tribe will be, and so forth. It has to be within the tribe. It has to remain there. So what do we do?